Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's lecture by one of the key people in German-American diplomatic relations over the past 5, if not more, years, the Honorable Philip Murphy, former ambassador to Germany, US ambassador. My name is Bettina Matthias, and I am the current chair of the German department here at Middlebury. It is a deep honor and distinct pleasure for me and all of us to welcome the ambassador and his wife Tammy to our campus. And I hope that you, Mr. Ambassador, will find us a captive and engaged audience as you will talk to us on the most recent developments in German-American and European-American relations. I am most grateful to President Leibowitz and his office for supporting our efforts to organize this event so substantially, and to the Rohatyn Center for International Affairs and its Associate Director, Charlotte Tate, for helping with all the logistics. Thank you very much. I know that all of you are here to hear the ambassador speak, and I will thus keep my introduction short. Ambassador Murphy's relationship to Germany goes back quite a long time, well beyond his appointment as the 21st post-World War II American ambassador to the Federal Republic in August 2009. Born in the Boston area and college educated in economics at Harvard, Ambassador Murphy continued his studies at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned his MBA in 1983. From there, he went on to have a very successful career with investment bankers Goldman Sachs. It was with this company that he and his family made Germany their home for several years for the first time from 1993 to 1997. Ambassador Murphy headed Goldman Sachs' Frankfurt office, overseeing activities in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. An additional 2 years in Hong Kong as director of Goldman Sachs Asia preceded his last position with the company as global co-head of their investment management division before he retired from it in 2006. After a 23-year-long career that I, as a German, fascinated with the phenomenon of the American dream, can only describe as a textbook American dream career. Now released, I don't know if you feel released or not, released from corporate America, Ambassador Murphy was offered the position as the National Finance Chair for the Democratic National Committee, a position offered by Vermont's former governor, Howard Dean, then chairman of the DNC. I'm not sure if this connection to Vermont might have played a role in Ambassador Murphy's decision to accept our invitation to come to Middlebury. If that is the case, a remote thank you to Governor Dean. In 2009, the newly elected President Obama appointed Ambassador Murphy to become his first top diplomat in Germany. Given Ambassador Murphy's experience with Germany and his passion for soccer that he shares with our Chancellor Angela Merkel, this appointment must have been a natural fit, and from what I read about it, he and his family had a most satisfying and personally enriching time in Berlin. I hope that is not overstated. After 4 years in office, Ambassador Murphy decided to step down and return to the US this past August, devoting his time to his philanthropic work, his firm Murphy Endeavors, LLC, and his family. We are so pleased to have him here today, so soon after his return from a very intense time in a Euro crisis-ridden Europe, and to share with us his assessment of German-American relations and their future. As he will now talk to us, we will benefit from what he once stated in an interview as one of the matters closest to his heart as an ambassador, and I quote, "The legacy of our time together in Germany will be measured by how well we set the table for tomorrow, by how deeply today's youth understand the ongoing relevance of the transatlantic bridge. They are tomorrow's leaders, and our investment in their future is our highest priority." Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to the former ambassador to Germany, the Honorable Philip Murphy.
That was a very gracious introduction. Some call a career at Goldman Sachs a slice of the American dream. Others call it something else from time to time. But thank you very much for your kind words. Tammy and I just spent a fascinating half an hour with President Leibowitz and are incredibly impressed by all that he and so many members of the faculty and administration have done and continue to do here. It's an honor to be here. So distinguished visitors, distinguished members of the faculty, insbesondere liebe Bettina, distinguished Vermont and Middlebury residents, students, insbesondere Cameron Wilson, who's been dragging us around campus all afternoon. Cameron, thank you, buddy. Even put on a tie for the occasion. Family and friends. Meine Damen und Herren, es ist mir eine Freude, hier zu sein. Meine Frau Tammy, stellst du bitte, Tammy Murphy. Meine Frau Tammy und ich sind überglücklich, hier in Middlebury zu sein. For those of you who don't speak German, I've just asked all of you to take off your shoes and do 30 push-ups. What an honor it is to be at one of America's great liberal arts colleges, and one with a particular distinction for international and language studies. Places like Middlebury make America great. And again, I salute in absentia the president and all the members of the faculty and administration and the student body who have done such a magnificent job achieving increasingly the objective of the world's global liberal arts college, not just America's best, but the globe's best. Keep up the great work. I mentioned family and friends before I go on. My wife, Tammy, obviously here. My cousin, Lynn Dunton, is here. Lynn, what a treat. And her husband, Charlie Biss. This doesn't happen every day. Lynn's sister is closely associated with Dartmouth College, where I gave a speech several months ago, and I forgot to tell Lynn's sister that I was coming. And that led to some awkward moments with my cousin Lori, and now I'm happy to say we preempted this with Lynn. So we got it right. Great to have you both here. Is Tucker here or not? No. Please tell him we said hey. Bob Cummings is in the house. Bob and I have known each other for over 3 decades. And I don't think if we were betting short odds that the next time we would see each other be in Middlebury, Vermont, but here we are. Great to be with you, Bob. And we're here because his rock star daughter, Melissa, just started here 3 weeks ago. Melissa, you got to raise your hand. And if you don't know her already, you will know her. She rocks. So for family and friends, old and new, it's great to be with you. These are unusually fluid times and treacherous times for both the German, U.S., European, and global relations. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with you all, is to make a series of observations in really bullet point format in the hopes of triggering a discussion, debate, questions, and answers by you all. Does that sound okay? Let's go. I will highlight or name my first bullet. The streets are screaming out, and we can't ignore that. Now, they scream out for different reasons, and I'd go back to the Arab Spring, the fruit vendor or the vegetable vendor in Tunisia, which started to trigger this whole Arab Spring, and since then all of the other street-driven action. Look at more recently, look at the past several weeks in Ukraine. Look at Turkey last year. Brazil last year. And by the way, Brazil's story is not just last year's story. We're big football fans, soccer fans, as Bettina said, and we read with interest that not that long ago, the 30th bus in Rio had burned this year, with the World Cup starting the second week of June. Look at Venezuela today, Thailand today. Look at Occupy Wall Street 2 years ago. Or maybe in a very bizarre, indirect way, but maybe also as a first cousin, the Tea Party movement, which took hold with great force in 2010. The specific reasons across all these countries are, in many cases, unique to the countries and to the situations at hand. But there are debates that are common across these screams. Inequality, a sense that there's an insider's club and that the rest of us are on the outside looking in. You know that movie Network? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. There's that feeling. Now, clearly, this has in many respects been triggered by the second worst financial crisis of the past 100 years. My favorite example of this, you may have read this, Tom Friedman wrote about this about 2 to 3 years ago, in Bahrain, where citizens constantly complained to the authorities that they did not have enough space in which to live. And this one gentleman in particular said, listen, there are 15 of us living in 3 rooms. And the authorities kept telling them year in and year out, actually, we've used all the available space, all the available infrastructure. There's nothing more we can do. And this is Tom Friedman's view of who gets the credit for the Arab Spring. And on his list was Google Earth. Because this guy finally woke up one day and he was able to look very clearly at how the land was apportioned in Bahrain and how overwhelmingly the land was being controlled by the ruling families. And that's one example where folks say, hey, wait a minute, this is not the deal we were told we were going to have. Now, this series of these observations are not specific and don't necessarily only relate by any means to the German-American relationship, but particularly in places like Ukraine, where these events unfold, and sometimes with great violence and great suddenness. Germany is the singular most important actor. Angela Merkel, to stay at one step further, is individually the single most important actor. You will note her telephone tag over the past 4 to 5 days with Vladimir Putin on the one end and Barack Obama on the other end. You'll note that the German foreign minister, along with the Polish foreign minister and the French foreign minister, were in Kiev trying to resolve this, doing the Lord's work and doing very good work. Germany, as this drama plays out, is the indispensable player, and Merkel its indispensable leader, the only European leader who's been now elected on three separate occasions. She's the last leader standing since before all these crises hit. Someone made the observation, and having lived in Berlin, you sort of have a sense of both sides of this. In much of Western Europe, there's a feeling of fatigue with the European Union, with the concept of Europe, with the specific notion of Brussels. If you want to see the real, this person then went on and said, if you want to see the real passion for Europe, you go to the East. And look at the citizens, particularly of the central and western part of Ukraine. Go to Poland if you want to get a sense of the real passion for Europe. And that's why Germany, take out a map, look right where Berlin is, look where Germany is. Germany plays that indispensable role. If need be, Merkel speaks to Putin in Russian, and by the way, if need be, he speaks to her in German, having lived in Dresden for a big chunk of his KGB career. More on that later. So we can't, my point would be this, we cannot collectively ignore, deny the screams. I'm not sure what the policy fixes are. I'm personally of the opinion in the United States that getting the minimum wage up is a good thing. Other people are on the other side of that argument. We live in New Jersey. They can't tax you anymore. You always feel in New Jersey like there's an insider's game and you're on the outside looking in. And I don't even mean including the scandals of the past several weeks. But we can't ignore this. This, I don't think, goes away with time. We have to preemptively get out ahead of this. It felt like Ukraine, there was a pregnant preemptive opportunity several months ago and the EU blew it. They won't blow it again, particularly financially, and I assume in coordination with the IMF and the United States of America. I said some glowing things, Mr. President, about you behind your back, so I owe you that as in your presence. It's an honor to have you here today, and thank you for having us. I mentioned that in all these screams, Germany plays an indispensable role. My second bullet would be specific to the euro. How's it going? How do we feel about the role Germany's playing? This is also fraught with risk. Germany clearly plays the singular most important role here. Germany, it's interesting. If you roll the clock back 20 years ago and you tried to predict how Europe would unfold, you would have guessed, we would have guessed, I'll bet, that Germany, France, the UK, in many respects Italy, would be seen over the next 20 years being the sort of core economic engines of Europe. That was the case largely until the euro. It was the case until Germany faltered and then had to reinvent itself under Gerhard Schröder. France has lost a step. The UK has enormous mixed emotions about its engagement in the European Union. It obviously made the decision not to be part of the currency union of the euro. Germany looks to the left and right and increasingly finds itself alone as the indispensable player. And I'm here to tell you they don't like that. Germany likes to be in a club. They like to be in a slipstream. They like to work it through the EU, through NATO as it relates to security. Increasingly, as they have gapped out economically, they're standing up on center stage, getting whatever credit comes their way and getting a whole lot of blame, particularly from the member states that are having troubles. My current prognosis as we sit here today is that the euro will succeed. The boat is halfway across the river. Unfortunately, the trip's going to take a lot longer than people hoped and expected. It is not without risk and not without pain, but it will get there because there's just no other choice. Everyone largely knows that, but Germany really knows that. It is absolutely in their interest to make this a success. But it is not without risk. If you look at now the 18 countries that share, to give you one proxy for the risk, in my opinion, 18 countries share this currency. Look at unemployment as a proxy for the risk right now. European-wide, the average is unacceptably high. It's 12 and change percent. The United States today, I guess, is just a little under 7%. By the way, I love your jersey. Big fans. What is more troubling, 12 and change is just unacceptably too high. Frankly, our unemployment rate's too high, but Europe's is far too high. What should concern us more is the high-low among the various member states that share the same currency. So in our 50 states, I'm not sure I know this, but I'm told North Dakota is basically, because of fracking, the lowest. Who'd have thought North Dakota? 3%. And the high end is maybe something like Nevada, 10%. So you got about 3 or 4 to 10. In Europe, the low end is probably Austria, Germany, 5, 6%. The high end is 28% and going up. And among youth, that's Spain. Among youth, unemployment is in Spain closer to 60%. So while I'm an optimist, and while I can guarantee you that Angela Merkel and the German government knows what they need to do and they'll do what it takes to get this to success, it is not without risk. And they're screaming from the streets on this as well, and the proxy for that is the unemployment rate. There's also another proxy, which is the emergence of far-right parties. My guess is that we're all Democrats, not the party, but the democracy, small d. But boy, I'll tell you, as passionate as I am about democracy, off-cycle elections have always worried me. Elections with low turnout. Forget about our midterm elections for a minute. How about the upcoming European Parliament elections, which have historically had horrible turnouts? Guess who does well in those elections? The well-organized parties, the parties that have the passion. And if you look in Europe right now, you have a lot of fatigue from the traditional parties and a lot of passion from parties that stand for stuff that, frankly, is not where we, I think, I'll bet, would collectively say history should be headed. They're not on the right side of history. And unlike in the German elections, where my German friends here know you need 5% to get into the Bundestag, in the European Parliament you need 3%. So even the protest party in Germany, which failed in their elections, that party will almost certainly make the European elections. They'll form a cabal with other like-minded parties, some of whom, frankly, are a lot more on the wrong side of history than the Alternative für Deutschland, which is, frankly, relatively benign among these right-wing parties. And that's also a proxy for the risk that we'll face. Again, there's no choice. The euro must succeed. One last observation. Because this travel across the river will take so long, thankfully, Bob and I have a former colleague who is the president of the European Central Bank and a good friend, Mario Draghi. And up until Mario's stewardship, the European Central Bank didn't look and behave a lot like the US Fed. They were very different central banking institutions. Mario, about a year and a half ago, uttered some very important words, and that is basically, we will be here as a lender of last resort. And that's a powerful statement. Those words alone diffused the immediacy of the euro crisis. Mario essentially built a bridge across this river, and that's good news. Again, with these risks that I've enunciated, the concern that we should all have is that bridge is not never ending. It's not going to be a bridge that will be there forever. The economies have to catch up. We need to hope that all that can be done for youth unemployment in particular in places like Greece, Portugal, and Spain is done now. The sooner, the bigger, the faster, the stronger, the better. I couldn't come here, and I promised Bettina I wouldn't come here, without speaking for a moment about spying. Tammy noted recently that no one wanted to hear from me about any topic at all until the NSA crisis broke. And now more people are interested in, and I have to believe that Tammy is right about that. This is serious, and I'll speak specifically on the German-American part of this because that's the piece I know best. It is a matter of trust. There's outrage, you know this, in America, there's sort of outrage at this sort of big brothers watching us on both sides of the Atlantic in both countries. But I have to say, I read the German papers every day and I get a summary of the German press. There's a disproportionate outrage right now, and I'd say that's existed for the past 2 or 3 months. There's more outrage in Germany. There's more I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it any more than there is here. It feels like here, and I don't know how you all feel, that this will fade with the passage of time. It recedes from the front page of the newspaper. Probably stays more of a front page issue for the many students here, and that's understandable, but it begins to fade a little bit. It hasn't in Germany. It's someone said, I don't know who said it, it's a unique event that requires a unique solution. And I've thought for months it requires Angela Merkel to say, listen, I got the Americans to agree to bump. And I've said many times, I don't care what the bump is. It could be written in crayon, frankly, for that matter. But there's got to be a bump. We got the Americans to do that. And until that's done, my guess is that Germany's sort of passion around this, outrage around this, will stay intense. However, it will pass. The relationship is stronger than this. It must pass. Look at the way we've coordinated on Ukraine. The world needs us to be in a groove. The president, I think quite smartly, if I may say so, and the chancellor quite wisely as well, have both, she's been invited and she's accepted an invitation to come to Washington. Not just substantively, but symbolically to make the statement that this is one of the most essential partnerships in the world. It will pass. I'm not suggesting it will pass tomorrow, but we've had other bigger crises in the relationship. And typically, and unfortunately, sadly, in many cases, it passes because a bigger crisis comes along where the world needs us working together. And you could look at the first Iraq war and then what's followed. You could go back to Pershing missiles in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan. You can go to Vietnam in the 1960s. You feel like the relationship is broken permanently. There's outrage. You can never see it getting back to par, and before you know it, it does. I lived through WikiLeaks, which was not pleasant. And I said at the time, and this really is much more serious than WikiLeaks, that it will pass, but it also might take the cast of characters changing over time on both sides of the relationship. That's probably also true to some extent. In other words, it will, hopefully something tangible will be arrived at. Passage of time helps, but it's probably also the case that some of the principal players, as they move on to other things in life, that will accelerate the mending. A couple of quick observations about energy and trade, which are big potential game changers and have the real opportunity to bring our countries closer, even at this very challenging time, particularly as a result of the NSA scandal. There are two energy revolutions going on between Germany and the United States, and they're going in very different directions. The biggest, most immediate political fallout from the Fukushima tragedy was felt in Germany. Angela Merkel made the decision that Germany was going to get out over a 10-year period the nuclear power in its baseload, the nuclear power element of its energy portfolio. By the way, which is about 21%, which is about the same as the United States. The United States obviously made a decision after reviewing all the 103 nuclear power plants that we operate that we're going to stay in that business. We have had, since that time, an exploding fracking revolution going on in our country. Germany is struggling with how it's going to replace this 21%, with alternatives, by the way, as their objective. So they have to look at things like refiring coal plants, getting more gas from the east, which has obviously geopolitical consequences, figuring if they can connect wind farms in the North Sea into Bayern in the dead of winter, your hometown. Bayern Munich or 1860? Bayern. Good, good, good. These are all complicated challenges. And what's going on right now? Prices are going up. The industrial base is getting very concerned. And there's real unrest. If you polled the big German multinationals, the big manufacturing firms, I'll bet you'd find more concern about the energy future than about the euro's future. This is a real issue, particularly when they're trying to make decisions, where's our next plant? And then they look at the United States, where the Germans are invested heavily and have been invested heavily for decades. Siemens employs more people in America, by the way, than Microsoft does. They have something like 75,000 employees. So Germans are not new to the American investment scene. But it's evolving, and it's evolving at a very rapid rate, to the detriment of the German Standort Deutschland and to the benefit, frankly, of our industrial future. Companies came here first because it was the biggest market economy in the world. It made sense to not just ship stuff here, but to go ahead and make it in America, get closer to the consumer. Everyone does that. That worked well. The auto business is the best example. Pharmaceuticals, chemicals. The next leg was, you know what, it's going so well here, we can export from here to places that are hard to export to from Europe, South America, parts of Asia. And that worked pretty well too. With this revolution in energy prices that we're going through, German companies are now lined up looking at America for now a third reason, which is to build their global X brand and export it all over the world, including back to Europe, which is unheard of. Interestingly enough, the constraining factor is now not energy. It's getting a trained up workforce that can do the high value-added jobs. Implications perhaps from, I'm going to end these remarks in a few minutes with some advice for our students. This is not one of my pieces of advice, but it's out there as a reality. People like Siemens can't get enough, essentially, apprentice-like workforce. They have something called, for you German students and scholars here, a duale Ausbildung system, which is you basically go to school and at the same time you're an apprentice for the companies. And you really learn this craft, but you also get an education. And you get paid well. These are high-quality jobs. Germany separates you sort of into two tracks, by the way, in education. We've got a 5th grader. We've got all the way up to a 11th grader. I don't think we could even come close with the 11th grader to separate what track or the other, but they separate you in the 4th grade. You're either going to a traditional US-style high school or you're going into an apprentice track. And because we don't do that, the German system doesn't fit neatly into our system. Community college or technical high schools probably come the closest. I say all that because of all the good news in the energy side. And by the way, I'm going to leave off all of the legitimate environmental concerns and just let's state for the record that there are legitimate concerns. Training will ultimately be the constraining factor. I mentioned trade as the other observation I wanted to make. There's a pending trade deal between the U.S. and member states in the Pacific, and there's a big pending trade deal between the U.S. and the European Union. And we're in the middle of negotiating both of them. I know only what I read in the newspaper about the Pacific deal. But on the European side, basically it comes down to two things as to why we should hope this succeeds. One is jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. The Bertelsmann Foundation wrote a couple of months ago that over 750,000 jobs will be created alone in the U.S. in each of our 50 states. Every state would increase its exports to Europe. And the number on the European side is even bigger. So jobs and standards. Who sets the standards? How do we feel? Biggest economy in the world, biggest economic bloc in the world coming together. Obviously, it's good for ourselves in those two respective blocs. But think about intellectual property rights and environmental standards and workers' rights. The price for failure to get a trade deal done across the Atlantic is first and foremost jobs. But secondly, somebody will set those standards for us. And think about that. Is that what we want? Do we want the environmental, the IP, the workers' rights standards set by us or for us? For all the jobs that will be created, frankly, for my taste, that's a more important reason to get this done and achieve success. A couple of comments specifically about Germany. It's got a new government. I want to spend 1 minute on its economy and 1 minute on its youth. Its new government, grand coalition. Any early sense of it? Well, they've already got a scandal. Apparently scandals are not just limited to New Jersey. They've got a big one on their hands in Germany right now. A very unique one, I have to say. Merkel's last government was a government that had a razor-thin majority. So every vote they took on Greece, on deploying troops, on almost anything, was literally one of these things. They were always looking for the Kanzlermehrheit, the chancellor's majority. And they weren't getting it in all these votes. This is a very different coalition in Germany. And for those of you who are not following Germany every day, it's essentially taking, forgive me for it's not quite the case, the Democrats and the Republicans here and putting them together in a joint government and leaving the fringes, the Tea Party folks, the hard liberal left of my party, in opposition. That's essentially what you've got. Merkel has done, she must have been watching Bill Clinton all those years because she's taken the Christian Democratic Union and step by step brought it into the middle and sucked up all the oxygen in the political middle. And there's nobody even close. The price that she's paid is that she's opened up some daylight in the right. And I referenced this earlier about the European parliamentary elections. That's where that's come from. So when you come into the middle, you're going to create daylight at the edges. And she's done that. And that could come back to haunt Germany, particularly on a European level. But this grand coalition feels to me, while largely in the direction of Merkel's prior governments, more forward-leaning on a few things. Pretty clearly, security, pretty clearly more willing to deploy its troops, if need be, for places like Mali to keep the peace. That's good news for the home team, by the way. Those are troops that we won't have to deploy. More forward-leaning, I think, on the euro. The SPD, which is our partner, is the party of Helmut Schmidt, Gerhard Schröder, Willy Brandt. This is also the party of the worker. So there's going to be a much more innate, in the core, sympathy with the plight of the worker in Greece, to pick an example. So they're, I think, more forward-leaning, more willing to use that huge majority. 80+%, by the way, the Bundestag are in this government. So it's almost inconceivable they could lose any votes on almost anything. And also Merkel, just one last observation, she's not only moved to the middle, I don't know how our German friends here feel about this, the successor is not in sight. Ursula von der Leyen is the new defense minister. She's the one name you keep hearing. But Merkel, it's Merkel and then a bunch of everybody else. She's an extraordinary, very unique, by the way, very funny, very smart politician. You all probably know this, grew up in East Germany, as did the Bundespresident, so the president of Germany, and the chancellor are both products of East Germany, which is a remarkable story, not just for Germany, but for them as individuals. She's a physical scientist. She speaks English better than I do. She's fluent in Russian, and she gets it. I said many times, how does she and President Obama get along? I said, listen, they look really different on the outside, but yet a constitutional lawyer and a physical scientist, when you open them up on the inside, I think they're wired the same way. Can Germany extend its economic miracle? They're arguably living off of Gerhard Schröder and his reforms. So Germany kind of went, when it reunified, it went sideways. It was the sick man of Europe. Tammy and I lived there as private citizens in the 90s. Germany was the sick man of Europe. And it took a socialist, just as it took Nixon to open up China and Clinton to reform welfare, it took a socialist to jam through very significant labor and benefit reforms. It's the reason Schröder ultimately got voted out. He paid with his political life. But Germany has lived off that. And also its secret sauce in its economy is the so-called Mittelstand. Private family-owned firms, overwhelmingly manufacturers, who are just willing to do things differently than public companies are. They're willing to hold on to the workforce. Kurzarbeit is a program that was brilliant, where basically instead of laying everybody off over on this side of the room, you went down by 15 hours a week. The state helped compensate you for that. And when business came back, you got called Friday night at 5 o'clock, be at work Monday morning at 8. No friction costs, no time to try to find and retrain a workforce. They did that brilliantly. Germany does need the next leg of reform. It's an aging, shrinking society. It doesn't like to be told to invest more in its domestic economy or export less. It gets blamed for a lot of the global economic imbalances. But I think there's plenty of scope for doing what's in its self-interest, its enlightened self-interest, to invest in a Germany 20 years hence that's an older society that needs even better training for the workforce coming into the for the folks coming into the workforce, and world-class late-in-life care for its aging population. That's a great, it's lagged in infrastructure, shockingly. It's got a little bit of a version, it's not as acute as America, it's got a little bit of a version that we have back here. We just haven't invested in the basic stuff to the extent that we should have, or the extent that others have. Roads, tunnels, bridges, railroad tracks, airports. Germany, which is a superstar 21st century economy, has lagged there as well. So it's got scope to get that next leg and stay ahead. It also can't operate indefinitely without reference to its neighborhood. If most of your exports are to the neighborhood, which they are, and the neighborhood is on fire, which it is, you can only play that card so long. It's another reason why the euro will last and succeed. Because Germany will see, if beyond all the good reasons, it will see it's in its cold-blooded self-interest. Charlie, I'm sorry to drive you out here, I apologize. In its cold-blooded self-interest to make sure that its neighbor and partner countries in Europe get back on their feet, and they will. Before I end with giving you a couple pieces of advice, I wanted to spend 1 second on Germany's youth. It's a fascinating story. How many of you have been to Germany, by the way? Oh, that's fantastic. How many of you have not been, but you're planning on going the next year? Melissa, good answer. Okay. It's a fantastic country, and my soft spot, is tut mir leid, is Berlin.
I'm from Munich.
But you just say this, okay, that's good to know. Berlin is built for the demographic in this room right now. It is built for the 17 to 30-year-old. And I used to say when I was ambassador, when a lot of students would visit, if they were American, I'd say, listen, have a great time in Berlin, but be careful. If you get into trouble out there, I'm the guy they call. It's a fantastic country, a fantastic city. It won't surprise, and many of you are old enough to know this better than I, it won't surprise anyone to hear that after World War II, Germany had essentially run out of adult males. And frankly, in many respects, teen males. So as it got back on its feet with the great visionary help of so many Americans who are in the Hall of Fame, George Marshall, Harry Truman, Lucius Clay, John Jack McCloy, and others, and then German heroes, Konrad Adenauer, first and foremost. As Germany got back on its feet and started to begin this extraordinary several-decade economic miracle, it was short labor. And so it did probably what any of us would do, and it tried to harvest farm labor in from elsewhere on a temporary basis. It would go to places like Turkey, Italy, Serbia, other places, and say, listen, could you come in and work for us for a couple of years? Help us form the bridge until we have a demographic that looks more normal. Neither side, not nefarious, no malice on either side. The Germans inviting these workers in, the workers coming in, assuming they were there for a couple of years, called Gastarbeiter, which has taken on in many cases a pejorative meaning, which is basically guest worker. Guess what? They never left. And the German government, to its fault, got to that notion, that realization, way too late. The guest workers, frankly, never really faced the mirror and said, you know what, we're not going back to Turkey. We're here for the rest of our lives. And we might even start marrying Germans, or our kids marrying Germans, and then we'll have a next generation or generation after. And pretty soon you wake up and it's in the 1990s. And you've got, throughout Germany, you've got the largest Turkish population in the world outside of Turkey. It's not a coincidence that Prime Minister Erdogan, when he starts his re-election campaign, he starts it in Dusseldorf and Berlin, not in Istanbul. And that's a fact. And it's not just Turks, but it's first and foremost Turks. And so you have this bizarre not coming to grips with it. For all of our immigration challenges that we have here, and we have many, this is one we figured out. And the Germans now look to us as the model. Why weren't we more like Americans? Why weren't we more like Jesse Jackson's vision, not just of the melting pot, but the one that I think gets it better, which is the vegetable soup? It tastes good, it steeps on the stove. The longer it steeps, the better it tastes. But the carrots always taste like carrots. The potatoes always taste like potatoes. But it works. Instead, you have the Turkish diaspora over there, and the unit, and everyone is off on their own. And slowly but surely it gets chipped away because there's intermarriage between natural Germans. I don't even know what that means, by the way. I don't know what a natural German is. I know what a Native American is. I don't know what a Native German is, but a natural German and an immigrant, still being called an immigrant, by the way, decades later. Only now has Germany begun to come to grips with that. Now there's upside there. There's huge upside. Germany, if it could continue the pace of coming to grips with this, it has more upside than one might guess at the moment, because this has sort of been a drag on its society and on its economy. My best example of the mindset that this instilled in Germany is a story that our family experienced in our first several months. We were in a pizzeria in Berlin. A very attractive, smart young woman came along to take our order. Our kids, who are now all essentially fluent German speakers, in our junior in high school, I mentioned to somebody, got a big affection for Middlebury because of that, I might add. Immediately, our kids realized she was not a native German speaker, that she had an accent. So they said, Dad, asked her where she's from. So this is all auf Deutsch. Woher kommen Sie aus? And she said, I'm from Serbia. This is all in German. Our son Josh, who Bob knows, immediately launches into the starting 11 on the Serbian national soccer team. Their strengths, their weaknesses, what their professional clubs are. The girl's eyes are rolling up into her head, and I'm trying to find a way to get out of this. So I throw a lifeline, and I said, how long have you been? You said you're Serbian. How long have you been in Germany. And she looked at me and she said, again, auf Deutsch, I was born here. I said, okay, sorry, I thought you said you were Serbian. She said, I did say I was Serbian. I said, you were born here? She said, yeah. I said, let me tell you, just between us, Sie sind Deutsch. She said, I'm not German. My parents are from Serbia. And we went at it, and there were two lines that did not cross. So if you had to, in a nutshell, capture what this slow to the party policy response and realization of steps that were taken in 1950, that's it. Now the good news is there's good news and bad news here, like there is everything else in life. This problem is beginning to solve itself with people in her generation. When Germany hosted the World Cup, many people will say this, and we see it, you see a lot more young Germans waving the German flag, the way Americans would wave our flag. The bad news is they don't feel the same connection with the United States, by the way. We can't take this generation for granted, so your equivalents, the students in Germany, don't wake up every morning surrounded, immersed in America. The bad news is the wall was up. The good news is when it was up, we were living with each other. 16 million American GIs and their families have lived in Germany since the end of World War II. The ultimate exchange program. So it is, the good news is they're coming to grips with themselves as a country. There are fascinating lessons for youth in Germany every day, like this looted art scandal. That opens up a whole new vista for a 25-year-old or a 20-year-old in Germany. That's all good news. The challenging news is, I don't know if we can afford to put every German kid and every American kid, as Middlebury does, on an exchange program, but that's what we should be doing. And absent that, my concern with this finding its real identity would be that block, that demographic in Germany will lose its grip on the German-American relationship. And we all owe it to ourselves to make sure we do everything we can to push back on that. I leave with some advice for the students. And I almost don't have to say this because we're in a temple of international and language education. Proficiency in a second or third language, better yet, is not a nice to have in this century. It's a got to have. So again, I'm in Middlebury. I don't have to say this, but take your languages seriously. And by the way, if you get really good at a second, use that as your opportunity to clock off a third. And whether you like it or not, in the language school here, as the president and Tammy and I were discussing, the one way to learn a language, with all due respect to your classroom instruction, which is among the best in the country, is to go to the deep end of the pool and jump in and swim and stay there. And to hopefully be surrounded by institutions and adults with enough wisdom, every time you beg to get out of the pool, you say, you're told, shut up and get back and swim. Our kids learned their German, and their German's outstanding on the soccer fields. And when the coach is yelling at you to do X or Y on the pitch, and you're not getting it, you're not playing. And boy, that's incentive to learn the language. Secondly, I mentioned this, again, I almost don't have to say this here, exchange programs. The correlation, the one thing we could do to make this world smaller is to walk in the other guy's shoes. And the correlation between an exchange program and affection and understanding for what was the host country, according to everybody I've spoken to, coming into the United States or going out, is 100%. So a German kid goes to Cedar Rapids, that changes them for life. They go back and celebrate their host family's dad's 80th birthday 40 years later. They never forget, and vice versa. So don't push back students on stay in the deep end of the pool, and don't push back on exchange program experiences. You all do arguably number one in the country, if not the world, for creating an exchange program environment in terms of language, deep end of the pool experience right here in your language schools, which as far as I can tell is the closest to language boot camp there probably is in the world. But I'll bet you it's got the best efficacy of any language program in the country. So learn a second, better yet third language, and learn it by immersion. Secondly, exchange programs. Thirdly, consider becoming a diplomat. We came to this late. I got lucky. And that's no way to run. It's no way. It's the formative experience of our lives. And to say you had that most formative experience of your life and it was because of luck, that's no way to plan a career. The real way to plan that is to consider, particularly if you're into languages, if you're into international studies, become a diplomat in your 20s. I mean, when you're our age, we have 4 kids, 3 dogs, a bird. We need a moving van to go get a quart of milk. When you're in your 20s, you can move like a cat. And you can move every 3 years. It comes with a cost, obviously, but it's an extraordinary career. And Bob and I work together at arguably one of the great private institutions in the world with extraordinary quality of individuals who work with us. But I'll tell you something, the State Department has the best and the brightest. They are extraordinary. They can hold their own against anybody. And again, if you've got language, proficiency and interest, if you've got passion for international stuff, if you like to travel, it's a great career. Consider it. Unrelated to that, this is always a good piece of advice. Don't ever mess with any ethical boundaries. And also we had another colleague, don't sit next to where the line is and get right up to it, even though you might think you're on the right side of history, because sometimes the line changes like this. And your behavior is non-compliant. So what do I mean by don't mess with it? Here's my best way to put this. Someone gave me this phrase and I love it. Always ask yourself, would I be doing this? Yeah, I'm standing up in front of you right now. I'm hoping not to commit any ethical faux pas. It's being taped. I hope I'm not that stupid. But how would I behave if the lights were out and nobody was looking? And that's the standard you have to hold yourself to. How will I behave if the lights are out and nobody's looking? Will I still do the right thing? Ask yourself that. Another piece of advice for you. Whenever you're asked in life, again, I'm speaking to the students here, why are you doing something? The worst answer you can come up with, number 1 on the list of worst answers, because everyone else is doing it. That's a horrible answer. It's a horrible answer. It might be that you ultimately get to the point where you're doing something that everyone else is doing, and that's okay. But you've got to answer it because I've thought through the following, and I've concluded, I've observed, I've thought it out, and I've concluded. I went to Harvard College. Freshman year, I get asked this all the time, why'd you major in economics? Because everyone else was. Ec 10 was the introductory economics course at Harvard. Otto Eckstein. Did you take it? No. 810 members of the class of 1,500 took Ec 10.
Oh my God.
810. And you got a lot of quality time with Otto Eckstein, I can guarantee you. It might have been the stupidest decision of my life. Made no sense. Don't come up with that answer. Don't ever use that as an answer. Okay, I have a prop for this one. I'm doing this right now because I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. We came back about 6 months ago, and Tammy and I have this every day. We discuss, should we do this, should we do that? Da, da, da. The benefit of being in school is you got to go to school by law. So we tell our kids, you have no choice. Go back to school and shut up. For us, we have too many degrees of freedom. So we always hold up a mirror to ourselves. So I would suggest you do this, and I'll show you what my mirror is. Ask yourself 2 questions. What am I good at? And what do I like? And those are 2 different things. And then plot. You can plot anything on there. Different careers you might choose. Courses you might take here. A radical one. How I will spend my week. I don't want to have everything in the same quadrant. So put a box. Good at, like or not. So here's mine. Did this just for you today. So this is good at. That's a good and that's bad. And this is like. Good, bad. So this is the quadrant that we always want to. I think I've become a good leader of people. And I like it. I enjoy that. I'm good at, but I hate having tough career discussions with people. I'm told I fire people really well. What a horrible thing to have on your tombstone. So just because you're good at it doesn't mean you like it. I want to be the lead singer in a rock and roll band. Could someone here help me out here? That's the real reason I've come today. But I can't do it. And then lastly, I hate technology, and I'm worse at it than you could imagine. So that's my little grid. Plot yourself, again, career opportunities, exchange program opportunities, courses, how I spend my week. You might say, one mistake, you might want everything to be up here. The problem is you never learn if everything's up there. If you keep doing the same thing that you're good at and you like, you kind of atrophy. So what you want to do is, even down here, you got to go to the dentist. I got to turn on my laptop. I got to go get singing lessons. Actually, I want to get singing lessons. Do this. Trust me. There's a book that I read 25 years ago. What Color is My Parachute? Have you ever heard of that book? It's got an overwhelming number of exercises like this. This is the best one. Okay, here's my last piece of advice, and this is not just for students. This is for everybody. It's in the form of a question. This is in the form of a question. You ready? You're hosting a dinner party. One in Berlin and one in New Jersey. The invitation says cocktails at 7, dinner at 7:30. The question is, what time do people show up in Berlin? And what time do they show up in Middletown, New Jersey? So here's the answer. Again, cocktails at 7, dinner at 7:30. First person and last person. First person in Germany shows up at 20 minutes before 7. And we've gone from our first couple of months there from being in our pajamas to by the end to be standing at the front door dressed in a suit. But there are some awkward moments. What time does the last person come? 7:05. How much time do they take apologizing to you? 10 minutes. Herr Botschafter, es war ein großer Stau, meine Schwiegerschwester ist schwanger und mein Auto ist... Dude, get inside, have something to drink right away. Okay, New Jersey. Cocktail 7, dinner 7:30. First person shows up 7:20, 7:25. Last person gets there. We have a couple who are consistently, they get there just about 8 o'clock. In fact, we've started lying to them specifically what time our things start. How much time do they take apologizing? It doesn't even occur to them. Don't forget that. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Thank you. We got time for a couple questions? Questions?
Would you take questions?
Absolutely. Any questions or comments? Please. You got it exactly right. And she's in a tough spot. And it got to the point where, at first, this crisis, I'll tell you something, this is another lesson in life, particularly for young people. Tammy and I went to Europe in the summer of '09, and we're not professional diplomats, as if I have to tell you that. So we needed to spend a couple of months in Washington. The State Department does an extraordinary job of getting you trained up. The Euro crisis, Bob, sovereign debt crisis, summer of '09, was never raised. No one was talking about it. So it's another lesson in life. You'll go to your college or your job, and you go there on one basis. And the basis I went to Europe was, I'm a former banker, but I'll never use that expertise because this is really about other stuff. And the Euro ended up being my life. At first, when it hit, so it hit winter, spring of 2010. So it's about 4 years ago this started to hit. And it really blew up in May of 2010, Greece that is. When it first hit, Bob, our side was so frustrated that Europe wasn't moving faster, stronger, bigger. It took, I'd say, probably about a year until each side understood the other folks' reality much more clearly. And she is incredibly, she is as good an example of somebody I've ever met in my life who does what she says she's going to do and describes situations accurately. And she said from the beginning, listen, I get a narrow majority in my own parliament. These bailouts require all 17 at that time members of the Euro to approve them. So if it weren't bad enough in your own parliament, you're herding cats And she used to say to the president, basically, listen, you guys, I noticed you're having a fair amount of challenges with your one legislative body, never mind the 17. But I'll tell you the thing that really, so we sort of started out over here and we moved to a very good place. The one area where we continue, and you see it literally out of the G20 meeting that just happened, where we're not seeing eye to eye, we still don't see global imbalances, which I mentioned earlier, the same way. We think it's dead obvious that Germany ought to invest more in its domestic economy, not to be nice to the world, but because it's in Germany's interest. We're not there yet. But on the euro crisis, it's at a happy point. We'd like to see more progress on banking union, a whole lot of other stuff. That would be probably number one on the list. But it ultimately got to a good place. And the way you can measure that is when Mario said what he said, which I think was in October of 2012, Chancellor Merkel said nothing, which in my way of thinking that was a huge endorsement. She's never come out and said anything about Mario or the ECB since then, which to me says she knows. And it's not surprising. It's a little bit like President Obama criticizing the Fed when you know Congress will not do what you've asked them to do, regardless of who's right. And in her case, when you know you've only got so many votes on money for Greece and you've got a limited asset, boy, you're dying for the central bank to come in and build the bridge. So that's where I'd say it is. Again, back to the summer of 2009, when we were getting our briefings and getting ourselves organized, there was a lot of, we're really focused on the German-Russian relationship, concerned that Germany was orienting itself more toward the east. What I found pretty quickly on, I have to say, and I would say as I stand here today, there's no romance on the part of Angela Merkel. This is, in the way she views Russia, the way she views Putin, is cold-blooded transactional. So if I need gas, this is what I'm prepared. You got gas, I'll pay you for the gas. A little bit of a concern about the Energiewende, that one of the consequences is that they're going to be more reliant on gas coming from others to the east. But the concern was really, I found, a holdover from the Schroeder years. Schroeder capping his chancellery, or his career as chancellor, by going almost immediately on the Gazprom board of directors was sort of the capstone of the concern. Schroeder, and we know all these folks well, there's more romance. The SPD has more romance, I think, if I had to put that word, for Russia. Not all bad, by the way, but more romance. Merkel is more cold-blooded. This is a transactional relationship. So, for instance, she's got on the phone with Putin, and according to what I've read in the newspapers, congratulated him on the Olympics. Well done, you did a great job. Now let's talk about Ukraine. I need you to come out and say, listen, we had this phone call, and we both said Ukraine's territorial integrity must remain intact. That there's no messing around, which is a concern, as you know, right now, that Russia's going to try to hive off, as it's done in its southern neighborhood, hive off the eastern part of the country, the Russian-speaking part of the country. So she's tough. I don't see any romance. I don't see any necessarily overt priority or preference on the trade side. Russia is now a WTO member, which it wasn't when I first went there, so that has consequences, but not because of Russia getting weighed more favorably.
Thank you.
And by the way, I would say, for the record, let's hope it stays that way. I think we should be very happy that she's the chancellor for many reasons, and on that one would be near the top of the list. A little exception to the premise, because I don't think there was an acceptance in the United States. I think my sister in Boston, who's a card-carrying left of left, her hair is still on fire as we sit here today on February 24th, 2014, about NSA and surveillance and all that. So I don't think it was whatever. I don't know how you all feel, but people were pretty outraged to hear all this. However, I did say, and I would grant you this, that if you sort of looked at the shelf life of that outrage, it's longer in Germany right now. And I think it must be because of, it was so personal, allegedly, to Merkel, and obviously the history. You've got a country that went through Nazism and then Stasiism, and now this. And so we each come at it differently. But I used to say this all the time, privacy matters to us too. It's in our Bill of Rights. It matters to Germans clearly. Our histories are different. We come to the middle of this discussion from a different place. But we each wake up in the morning. You know, by the way, interestingly enough, when you become an ambassador, the thing that they drill in you, what's your number one responsibility? What's your number one responsibility? And you think it's something else, actually. It's the safety and security of the American citizens in your host country. That's number one, and you can't escape that. And that we live that. And we had some unfortunate tragedies happen during our time there. President Obama, or any president of the United States, his number one job is the safety and security of American citizens. You just cut out in your host country, period, around the world. So if you're if you're the top of a free and democratic society, as both Angela Merkel and Barack Obama is, you're sort of in a big piece of construction equipment. And you've got two levers that you wake up every single day trying to get in the right balance. And every day is a challenge. One is the safety and security of your citizens, and one is the right to privacy, civil liberties of your citizens. And you have to get these levers just right, because if you don't, you throw one of these two noble objectives under the bus. So you can imagine a state where security is guaranteed and you have no right to privacy. Who wants to live in that state? Or a state where you've got a complete right to privacy and no interest in security. I guarantee you won't live in that state because something will happen. So getting that right is hard, man. It is hard. And that's not, and the president himself said, he's not happy that Snowden is the reason it's triggered. But he did say he welcomed the discussion and the debate. And so I am an optimist, and I'm not suggesting we'll get through this tomorrow. But we'll get through this. But don't underestimate how challenging that is, and particularly for the President of the United States, because at the end of the day, as it relates to terrorism, as important as an ally as any of these countries are, sort of the core players start from the U.S. on out. It's a burden for leaders of any free and democratic societies, but first and foremost for the American president. Thanks for having me. Good night.